Caseus, Jedi Redeemed. Chapter 3. Caseus awoke inside of his cell, chained up to the wall. The head slaver stood outside. Hearing Caseus struggle against the restraints, he turned, knife in hand.
"Awake, are we?"
From around the corner stepped Kavu.
"You are becoming far more trouble than you're worth, Jedi. First you're slacking in your work, then you get that poor young boy into trouble. Now you've killed one of your superiors. It appears that standard discipline isn't enough for you anymore. We'll have to try something a little more drastic."
The guard held a flaming torch beneath the blade of his knife and slowly heated it.
"Why don't we start simple?"
Caseus breathed heavily and struggled as the guard stepped over and dragged the red-hot blade across his chest, slicing deep as Caseus screamed. Ever so slowly, the blade was lifted from his flesh, the smell of charred skin and blood filling his nostrils.
"I'm seeing a nasty scar above your left eye there, Jedi. Why don't we add our own flair to it?"
The guard took the blade from the flame once again and moved it to the top of Caseus' forehead and slowly dragged it down, across the scar he had received from Boba Fett years ago. The pain was unbearable as he cried out, the loud hiss of metal searing skin ringing in his ears. It felt like an eternity before the blade was removed, and Caseus shook and rattled against the chains, gasping and crying.
"Do you understand the severity of your crimes yet, Caseus?"
Caseus nodded and whimpered.
"No, not yet." "Cut out his eyes."
Caseus breathed heavily as the guard stepped over with the knife, inching it closer and closer to his right eye, the heat beginning to burn. When Kavu's comlink beeped. Holding up his hand to the guard, he stopped and lowered the knife as Caseus sighed in relief.
"This had better be important." "Sir, the Empire is here. They're waiting by the freighters." "The Empire? Tell them to stay put. I'll be there shortly."
Kavu put his comlink back into his pocket and looked to Caseus.
"You hang tight. I'll be back within the hour."
Kavu stepped out of the cell along with the guard and turned to the torturer.
"Keep an eye on him. The fun continues when I return."
The guard nodded and stepped in front of the cell as Kavu made his way out to the freight yards, pushing past slaves towards an Imperial shuttle, where an officer stood accompanied by 2 stormtroopers.
"My greetings to our esteemed soldiers of the Empire. Forgive me if I seem forthright, but an unannounced visit. Might I ask the reason?"
"We have been told that there is a very special prisoner amongst you here. Can you confirm?"
"We have many slaves here, officer. I'm afraid you'll have to be more specific."
"Is that right? We are looking for a Jedi." Kavu slowly backed up.
"I'm afraid you've come to the wrong place if you're looking for a Jedi, my friend."
The officer stepped closer. "The Empire has eyes everywhere, Kavu Natesh. And our sources say that you indeed have a Jedi here, within the ranks of your servants. Someone very special wants to see him. I think you know who." Kavu looked uneasy.
Well, it is possible that one of these slaves may be... Why don't we discuss what you're looking for exactly?"
"Lead the way, then." Kavu led the officer and his soldiers to the turbolift and up towards his office. Upon their arrival, Kavu sat behind his desk.
"Have a seat."
"I'll stand, thank you."
Yes, of course. Now, you said that You believe there may be a Jedi within the ranks of our indentured workers? However, I was under the impression that the Jedi were extinct. The idea that you would find one here is, well, ludicrous, if I might say so. Really, far be it from me to call you a liar. But you understand that Lord Vader takes these matters quite seriously, yes? It truly would be a shame if we were to discover evidence to the contrary. If there is a Jedi here, well, I'm afraid that losing a slave would be the least of your problems. Kavu looked extremely uneasy as his hands twitched. Why don't I look through my files? Inside of his cell, Caseus hung from the chains in agony, whispering to himself. There is no emotion. There is peace. The guard overheard his pathetic whimpers and looked through the bars. Quiet! There is no ignorance. There is knowledge. Hey! I said shut up! There is no passion. There is serenity. You want me to cut out your tongue, you rat? There is no chaos. There is harmony. That's it. The guard snarled and opened the door, holding the knife. Let's silence you once and for all. The guard suddenly seized up and fell over unconscious, as Caseus stared in shock and confusion. What Captain! From around the corner of the cell door, a little rusty pit droid holding a modified wrench ran inside. Pip?
Oh man, Captain! What did they do to you?
Caseus couldn't respond as his head was spinning.
Well, don't you worry, Captain. I'll get you out. Hold still.
From a little brown satchel strapped to his back, Pip drew a green lightsaber, a sight Caseus hadn't seen in years. Carefully, Pip used the blade to cut through the chains holding Caseus up and freeing him as he dropped to the floor.
Easy, Captain. Come on, follow me.
Caseus stood as best as he could and slowly took the lightsaber from the droid, staring at it. He closed his eyes before following Pip through the tunnels where the slaves were hard at work. Quickly, Caseus and Pip hid behind a mound of rocks.
Captain, any ideas?
Caseus shook his head and tried to think of something. Anything. He still wasn't sure this wasn't some pain-induced hallucination. I think... Caseus looked up over the mound of rocks and saw a few of the slave drivers making their patrols. Get their attention.
Gotcha!
Pip ran out from behind the rocks and jumped up and down.
Hey! Hey, you guys! Over here! I think one of your slaves escaped!
Chuba!
The slaves ran over to Pip, who was pointing behind the mound of rocks. As they turned, holding their whips, they saw nothing. Until Caseus revealed himself from behind a blind corner, slicing through the waist of one of the slavers. The other tried to fling his whip out at the weary Jedi, but Caseus wouldn't have it, catching the whip around his cybernetic arm and pulling the slaver forward and smashing his face against the jagged wall of stone.
Whoa!
Caseus looked down at Pip. Where's the ship?
Outside by the freighters.
Who else is here?
Guidom, Bendel, and the others. A few rebels to give us backup, too. Tosa has the Arabella on standby right now. He's just waiting for Guidom's signal.
Where is he?
Keeping the boss man distracted.
Caseus glared and looked at Pip. Call Tosa. Tell him to have the Arabella ready. I'm going to speak to Kavu.
And do what?
Do as I say, Pip. Go. Pip saluted and ran off through the caves as Caseus made his way over towards the turbolift. As he did, two guards stood out front and aimed their blasters at him as he approached. Their lives were snuffed out instantly as Caseus stepped into the turbolift. Inside Kavu's office, he was digging through data files when his desk comm blinked to life.
Lord Natesh, a prisoner has escaped. I repeat, a prisoner has escaped. Men down!
Kavu stared at the desk comm in fear before looking back to the officer.
No Jedi, you say?
Kavu glared.
Wait a minute. What are your credentials?
Gaidom stood and threw off the Imperial cap adorning his head.
I have none, because I don't work for the Empire.
Kavu drew his blaster and aimed at the Jedi, when the stormtroopers on either side of Gaidom drew their rifles and aimed at the pike. Kavu slowly raised his hands.
You have no idea the trouble you're in, you rebellion Slimo. My gods were...
Kavu suddenly began to clutch at his throat as he was lifted from the ground. Turning around, Gaidom saw Caseus stepping into the office, holding out his hand, clutching Kavu through the force.
Caseus!
Caseus pushed past Gaidom, grabbing Kavu by his neck.
Caseus, stop!
Caseus turned to Gaidom and used the force to send him flying back against the wall, before turning his attention back to Kavu.
Stop this! You can't do this to me!
Ask for mercy. Say, I'm sorry, Master. Say it.
I'm sorry, Master.
Now say, please spare me, Master.
Please spare me, Master.
Before Kavu could finish, Caseus ignited his saber through Kavu's neck, ending the life of his tormentor.
No.
Caseus! Gaidom ran over to Caseus, who shut off his saber and glared at the corpse of Kavu.
Caseus, you get me out of here.
Gaidom stared at the broken man who he once called his friend, before activating his comlink.
Pip, contact Tosa and...
Way ahead of you. We're outside the office right now.
Opening the metal shades on the window, Gaidom saw that the Arabella was outside, with Pip standing on the open ramp.
Come on!
Gaidom turned to one of the stormtroopers who removed his helmet, revealing Bendel underneath, as he fired at the window, shattering the glass and allowing them to leap out onto the ramp. Caseus followed, and as soon as he was on the ramp, turned, and saw several intercepting slaver speeders heading towards them. From behind Caseus stepped Kresh with his buster cannon. Roaring loudly, he opened fire on the speeders as Caseus deflected the incoming fire away.
Inside! Hurry! Before more show up!
Caseus and Kresh ran into the ship as the ramp closed and the Arabella took off into the sky. There was a loud cheer from the crew as Gaidom smiled and looked at Caseus, who stared out of the viewport.
Caseus, it's okay. You're free.
Caseus looked at Gaidom with an empty stare as his eyes glazed over, and there, in front of his friends and allies, he collapsed to the floor.
Captain!
When Caseus woke up, he was floating in a bacta tank, his vision fuzzy and his muscles weak. He heard the top of the tank open as he was delicately hoisted out and set down onto a mat on the cold stone floor.
Caseus, can you hear me?
As his vision returned, he found himself looking into the eyes of Gaidom.
Easy. Sit up. Slowly.
Gaidom slowly hoisted Caseus onto a bed and wrapped a towel around him.
I can't believe it. We finally found you.
Caseus stared at Gaidom, not saying a word.
Caseus, What happened? Where are the others?
Outside.
Send them in.
Caseus,
Send them in.
Gaidom looked in pity upon his friend, but nodded and went to the door, ushering the others in. Pip, Bendel, Tosa, Kresh, and a young man with dark skin and short black hair. Caseus recognized him. Daros, the boy that he and Corbin saved from the Valkorians.
How are you feeling, Caseus? Don't push, Daros, he just woke up.
What went down? Tell us!
Caseus held up his hand and shut his eyes.
Everyone, stop talking. And I'll tell you.
Everyone in the room sat down as Caseus took a deep breath.
We had just left Bakura, and we were intercepted by another ship. We were caught and incapacitated. Dotami Fortuan. For years he went around gathering people that wanted me dead. One of the Trandoshans from the temple attacks, Valkorians, and Rax's son Haji.
What happened?
Caseus stared at the floor, his long dark hair hanging in front of his face.
Caseus, what happened to Liara?
Liara's gone.
Bendel's eyes filled with sorrow as his heart sank.
Dead?
They killed her. Right in front of me. And I couldn't do a thing about it. Then they sent me to Kessel. Now here I am.
Pip slowly looked down and walked out of the room to be by himself. Guidome sat next to Caseus and put a hand on his scarred back.
I'm sorry, Caseus.
It doesn't matter.
What?
Caseus looked up at Guidome.
I'm sorry too. I've been sorry for nearly 4 years. It's not going to bring her back. Liara's dead. I failed. My Liara is gone. And there's nothing I can do about it.
Caseus slowly rolled over in the bed and stared at the wall.
Caseus.
Caseus said nothing more, ignoring everyone and everything. Guidome sighed and stood as he ushered everyone out of the room and closed the door to let Caseus be by himself.